Hello, everyone, and welcome to the continuation of the Dharma and Justice dialogue series. This series is from the Thich Nhat Hanh program for Engaged Buddhism, and my name is Peace Twessiji, and I am the program manager for this program, as well as Buddhism and Interreligious Engagement, where students are pursuing master's degrees all here within Union Theological Seminary in the city of New York. So this evening, the director of the Buddhist program, Reverend Kosen Gregory Snyder, will be in conversation with Reverend Grace Song and James Lynch. So I will just read their bios now so you have a sense of who will be speaking in this conversation. So Reverend Grace Sunjin Song is the One Buddhist Studies Department Chair at the One Institute of Graduate Studies and Buddhist Chaplain at the University of Pennsylvania. Reverend Song is an ordained Kyomu in the One Buddhist tradition. Before joining the One Institute faculty, she taught at Yongsan University of Sun Studies in Korea. Her research interests include women in Buddhism, interreligious dialogue, and contemplative studies in higher education. She presented her research at the International Symposium for Contemplative Research and the Association for Contemplative Mind in Higher Education. Reverend Song serves on the advisory committee for the Gen X Buddhist Teacher Sangha, and was recently appointed to the Mayor's Commission on Faith-Based and Interfaith Affairs in Philadelphia. If she's not on the cushion, you will most likely find her browsing interior design magazines. It's good to have you with us. And James A. Lynch Jr. is a Dharma teacher, as authorized by the lay Buddhist organization Visho Kosakai. He is an official representative for their outside affairs in New York City, in the New York City area, as well as an official representative for Visho Kosakai to the United Nations. James is currently the president of the Buddhist Council of New York, which represents more than 750,000 Buddhists in the tri-state area. In addition, he has helped organize the Heiwa Peace Foundation, a think tank for peace, whose primary work is done in the United States and Asia on behalf of its founder, the Venerable T.K. Nakagaki. He further sits on the board of Religions for Peace USA, which is the largest interfaith peace organization in the US, and he was appointed as a trustee to the prestigious Parliament of World Religions. James is also a tenured professor and chairman of the Business Management Department at the Koppelman School of Business, located in Brooklyn College. We're happy to have you as well. And the third panelist in this evening is Reverend Kosen Gregory Snyder, who is the Senior Director and Assistant Professor of Buddhist Studies at Union Theological Seminary, where he oversees the Masters of Divinity degree program in Buddhism and Interreligious Engagement, as well as the Thich Nhat Hanh program for Engaged Buddhism. Professor Snyder is an ordained Zen Buddhist priest and Dharma transmitted teacher in the lineage of Shunryu Suzuki. He co-founded and is currently the senior resident priest at the Brooklyn Zen Center and Ancestral Heart Zen Monastery in Millerton, New York. He is one of the founders of the Buddhist Action Coalition, whose mission is to organize and inspire compassionate Buddhist initiatives in advancing social, economic, and environmental justice through advocacy and nonviolent direct action. Professor Snyder's academic and practice interests include socially engaged Buddhism, the intersections of contemplative interreligious dialogue and social action, the relationship between Buddhist liberatory practices and social transformation, and the exploratory juxtaposition of Buddhism with liberation theology, earth-centered cosmologies, and Western continental theory, particularly phenomenology and post-structuralism. Professor Snyder is currently working on a book exploring expressions of social justice rooted in Buddhist Dharma, moral epistemology, and praxis. So happy to have you facilitating this conversation. I would also like to say a quick thank you to Ian Reese, who is working very hard behind the scenes to help this event run smoothly, and also to Travis and Cheryl, our ASL interpreters here tonight, allowing for more full accessibility for this evening. Now, what you've been waiting for. This evening's conversation will explore this. How often do we turn our attention to unconscious conscription in a momentary way? From the products that we buy to the ways that we speak to loved ones and strangers, and even the thoughts in our minds, we are ascribing to something. Are we aware of what is happening? What is the effect of Americanism on religions originating from outside the United States, such as Buddhism? In the general population, misinformation often preys on immigrant populations, and all of our biases may be contributing to its uptake too. As Buddhist practitioners, addressing this may start with our own awakening and addressing the their, our ascriptions, where people, especially from immigrant populations, might ask, what do their issues have to do with us? I am personally looking very much forward to this conversation with these experienced, engaged Dharma practitioners and teachers. And so for those of you in the webinar, the Q&A box is open. So feel free to drop questions that may come up during the conversation in the Q&A box while it's happening. Questions easily get lost in the chat, so be sure to put any questions that you want the panelists to see in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. There will be time reserved at the end of the last portion of the evening to address questions. So enough from me. Welcome everyone, and now I'd like to turn it over to Cosin.
Thank you, Peace. And I just want to start out by saying thanks to Peace Twesigye, who organized this event and this whole series of conversations so that we can show up and engage in them. And there's a tremendous amount of work that goes behind all of this. So I just want to express my gratitude over and over again for everything that you do, Peace. Thank you. At this point, I would just invite Grace and James to come on, and we can start having a conversation. It's good to be with you both. Thank you both for being here and taking time out, and you're always very generous with your time. And I think I'll just start by looking at this. Grace, I want to thank you because you were the thrust behind framing this conversation. And there's a lot in these series of questions, right? There's a lot going on here. And one of the things that strike me are this notion of bringing attention to our unconscious conscription with any kind of systemic processes that we might not be aware of, but in a momentary way, in a moment-to-moment way. So how are we paying attention to this all the time? But there's something else here, and I'll just add to this, which you're pointing both to the violence that can be brought. So we're in a situation within Buddhism, very generally speaking, in the United States, where we have, and these are rough categories that are not entirely accurate, but they'll facilitate this conversation, I think, where there's one group of Buddhists who brought Buddhism to this country initially. And these are the people who immigrated to this country as Buddhists and brought the Dharma to us. And then there's another group of people that have converted to Buddhism here. And I divide them in such a way because in some ways there is a bit of a division. In a lot of ways, there's often not a communication across these communities, right? And so the questions that you bring to us points to how are we, in some ways, how are convert Buddhists a part of not attending to the needs and what's going on in the Buddhist communities, to which we owe our own our gratitude for our own receiving of the Dharma. But also there's something else that you pointed to, which goes in the other direction, which is what are, how are those communities involved in what's happening in the United States historically? Is this relevant to those communities, and how are they engaged? So I'll stop there and I'll just ask a simple question to both of you. What brings you into this conversation? Why is this a conversation that's important to you? And maybe the aspects of your background that help us understand that as well. So maybe Grace and then James.
Sure. So thank you for this invitation. So when I first started to think about this topic, I'll be honest, it didn't feel comfortable. I was really trying to think about why does this feel uncomfortable? And I just felt a kind of a mix of emotions of vulnerability mixed in with shame too. When I talk about, the question for me was, where do I stand in the capitalist, white, patriarchal, supremacist hierarchy? And this question came to me when I saw, this was last year when I did see the death of George Floyd, right? That to me, something struck me in that moment. And I remember a feeling of rage, but it was a rage. So there was the external rage of the situation itself. But then at the same time, I was experiencing internal rage as well. And I was trying to see why that was happening to me. And what I began to realize was that I had fooled myself into thinking, okay, you're not a racist, you're not a racist. But I realized too, I was not an anti-racist either. So after living in Korea for 12 years and coming back here in 2018, I was struck with that. And so it was that realization of, Grace, you've been, perpetuating this, you being white adjacent and perpetuating this oppressive system against your own ancestors. This was the thought that came to me. But then I had to have mercy on myself too, I realized, because I was in that system, that had everything was a symbol of whiteness. That was what was surrounding me. I didn't see my face in media, for example, or entertainment or in Hollywood, right? So everything to me was always that standard of whiteness. And so with that rage, there was this moment of, okay, Grace, have mercy on yourself. However, realize that your actions right now are going against your spiritual vow. I was ordained in 2006. And when I ordained, the promise that I made to myself and to the realm of truth and to my community was that, Grace, you are pursuing this path to liberate, and myself is included, but liberate all sentient beings who are suffering in the bitter seas of suffering to a vast and immeasurable paradise. And I wasn't doing that, I realized. And so in that moment when I saw George Floyd, I said, this is enough. You got to do the work. You got to do the work. And no one is going to do it for you. And I've been blessed because I've been seeing so many people around me who are doing the work, James, Greg included, learning so much from both of you. And now it's as a one Buddhist kyomunim, I feel it's a responsibility to do the work myself, to renew myself so that I can help renew my community, the country, and the ripple effect outward. But the starting point is me. But I've been blessed also because the community that I am involved with is that they've been open. They've been open to learning and unlearning, right? And so that's where we are right now. my community were mostly, immigrants from Korea. And when I read about the history of Asian Americans, and I think about the first Kyomunims who came here to the United States, it brings tears to my eyes because they had their own suffering. They didn't know the language. They didn't know the culture. They had to work, but they built the foundation. And, this is one of the things that our community is also doing, is that we are honoring, the first people who established Won Buddhism here in the United States. Right. So that was just kind of my intro of a mix of the unconscious, conscription, but also to touch on Greg's point about, the immigrant community and the converts. We're in a position right now with my community where it's mostly, in terms of clergy, immigrants from Korea. However, we're transitioning, right? But we can talk about that more later. So thank you for providing the safe space. Yeah.
In my case, as I was listening to Reverend Grace, I was realizing that the reason why I'm here is because I have no choice. My ancestors, at least as far as they relate to the United States, they were, in fact, as I mentioned in the green room, I call it, they were slaves here in the United States. Martin Luther King used to have a famous saying, I don't like going to him all the time because everybody uses him as a watchword person, but he called it the fierce urgency of now. And if we don't change our ways now, we'll be destroyed. I don't know what everybody else is thinking, right? But it's sort of like being on the Titanic, everybody's partying, and you're sitting on the thing saying, oh my goodness, there's an iceberg coming, get us to move. And so for me, the Dharma and the practice, how we got on the ship is irrelevant. How the people are acting is the key component of we have to change ourselves and to get the other people who are partying on the ship to change. But if we don't stop doing what we're going to do, we're clearly going to crash into the rocks of disaster. So with regards to the convert and I call it the heritage community, because that's where I've inherited the Dharma and the Buddhist teaching from that community, from Japan. I'm a Risho Kosakai member. I feel that if we don't change what is now being currently framed as white supremacy, or I call it the supremacist ideology of control, we will be destroyed. We have to add new seeds into that process. We have to look at human beings in a totally new way, a way of hope. Evaluations have been changed by looking at them for real and seeing our connection to the land. A whole new way has to be envisioned, a new culture of peace, I call it all the time. And in this context, as Reverend Grace was pointing out, I think what we see happening, at least in the New York City context, a lot of times the heritage community is quiet. They're suffering. We had a spat of anti-Asian violence going on. And so in my role as the president of the Buddhist Council, we went and addressed that issue. That was a serious issue. And I do believe the convert community stood behind that. But too often we're standing on the sideline waiting till things happen and we don't take action. We need to be there at the front before it happens. And we need to begin to change the course of the dialogue before something bad occurs. We need to be the positive causes of what we want the outcome to be. Causes plus conditions equals outcomes in that sense. What are the positive causes that we're putting in so we can have the positive outcomes? So why am I here? I have no other choice. My life requires it, and my ancestors demand it.
So both of you brought up, I just appreciate you bringing your lives and ancestors into this and into this conversation. And I think this is, I feel for me, this is central to any time we're talking about transmission of Buddhism as well. Not just the transmission of violence. We've received that transmission. received the transmission of the heroic efforts of the peace builders.
Mhm.
We've received the transmission of the Dharma through our heritage communities. And one thing that we talked a little bit about before that I'm curious about is what you all have to say is when I look at my own community, how these my own tradition and how these wrap together, right? So I'm somebody who is transmitted to teach the Dharma within the Soto Zen tradition. But the Soto Zen tradition was brought here in 1922 by Japanese immigrants. And up until very recently, there was a habit of talking about it as if it started in the 60s. And the reason that habit existed, we know, is because that's kind of when white folks started practicing Soto Zen. So it's as if the history started then. But there was one really important thing that happened in between those 1920s and the 1960s, which was the internment of Japanese Americans, Japanese Canadians.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's land was taken, family structures were attacked, wealth was destroyed, businesses were destroyed. And between the time when Soto Zen actually arrived and it was practiced by white people, there's this gutting, this attack. And so we can't really look at, I can't look at my own authorization, if you will, without that in between, without that being a part of the reality of Soto Zen being moved over into, in some cases, a lot of white authority. So I think there's just, I want to bring into the space that there is this is happening, and yet at the same time, I feel very supported by Japanese elders and the priests in Japan and the people who want the Dharma to be here and want us practicing and fully embrace that. So there's this history of violence, and there is this great gift of the Dharma that's being passed down by our elders, and we're negotiating that in the way we're interacting with each other across these communities. So I'll just open that up and say, what do you notice? What is real for you when you're looking at that kind of negotiation from your positions?
I'll speak first, James. Okay.
Yes, please.
Thank you. So just listening to Greg, I actually feel blessed that I have both the Korean roots in me, and I was born in Canada, right? I realize now that I'm that bridge. When Buddhism started in Korea, 1916, southwestern part in Yeonggwang. That's the birthplace of the founding master Sotaesan, right? This is where it started. The history is that the first disciples of Master Sotaesan were illiterate. Some of them were illiterate farmers, either peasants, right? Who, if you think about it, were not educated, but they were told by their teacher all of a sudden that you can attain Buddhahood. You can attain Buddhahood. And this was in 1916. I think if you were to ask them, do you think that this will go abroad? I think they'd first say, you're crazy. What are you talking about? No way. It's not even going to go to Seoul, right? Back then. So it's amazing. To me, the number one thing is I'm amazed that our history is only 106 years old. And here we are. We're in like all the different continents. And we're in a position where we are asking the question, what parts of the Won Buddhist Korean culture, history do we keep? Which one do we assimilate? Which ones do we change? Right? But what's very interesting is that when our members who have no connection to, maybe they don't have a connection to Korea. They had no connection to Won Buddhism. And then they actually make that pilgrimage to Korea. It's life-changing. Knowing and not knowing makes such a huge difference. Sharing a meal with pre-ministers or ministers of Buddhism, we call them Kyomunims, seeing the birthplace of the founder, chanting in Korean with the whole group of people, being in that energy, it shifts a person's way of thinking. So I feel that for Won Buddhism, in order for us to keep the spirit alive, the Korean, the culture, the roots alive, there has to be that strong connection with where it was founded. And that's why even our students here at the Won Institute, as part of the program, what we build in is a pilgrimage to where Won Buddhism was founded, right? And they come back and they'll say, now I understand why you do this certain ritual. Now they're like, now I want to start chanting in Korean, right? I want to learn more, because they're hearing the stories. They're hearing the stories of the masters. They're hearing the formative years, how difficult it was. And it was difficult. We're talking about Japanese colonization in Korea, right? War and hunger. Our second head Dharma master, stories of being at the headquarters and not having enough food. So they would ring a bell, and if you ring the bell, then everyone knows it's mealtime. But there were days when that bell, you did not hear a sound, right? And you knew that there was no food, right? And they were so poor that they would have these they would have these outfits, that you wear when you go out. It'd be like small, medium, large, and you'd have to sign your name to rent the clothes to wear because you're so poor. So if you were going out, you put your name down and say, I'm going to wear it tomorrow at such and such time, right? And that's how they lived. And so when I think about that, I said, we cannot forget the roots of our tradition, because that is why I sit here today. This is why I'm here, because there were people who had strong faith and dedication who laid the foundation. So Won Buddhism in the United States, although it's planted here in the United States, we have to, in my view, keep that connection and learn the history, hear the stories. And I think my role as a Korean Canadian is to make that possible by acting as that bridge.
Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you. Made me think as I was listening to you very much. Two things came to my mind. First, I wanted to put it in the context of, Black suffering in the United States has been very severe. But one of the dangers is that we often look at ourselves through the lens of the oppressor. We often think that's the only way we can be. And so for me, Buddhism as an African-American, Black Buddhist, a convert, what the power of what Buddhism enabled me to do is to look at my suffering in a new way. Martin Luther King, again, going back to him, you said there was a big phrase in the 60s, suffering can be redemptive. That was the whole thing. Suffering can be redemptive, suffering can be redemptive. But Buddhism says suffering can be transformative. It can be a process by which you can have liberation. It can be the path to your Buddhahood, to your enlightenment. So that was very empowering for me as an individual African-American Buddhist. I think that message is beginning to resonate in the American community greater and greater. And then I wanted to just pick up on what Reverend Grace said. Some of the greatest moments that I've had as a Buddhist is when I went to pilgrimage to Japan. And I saw the early Buddhists who didn't have any, then like you said, they had no knowledge. They never thought of Black. As a matter of fact, I went to one of the founders' contemporaries and he started crying. And he said, my father told me that one day an American's going to come here, and I told him he's crazy. He said, so we started crying. And then I would go to the various temples or churches, that they would call them there. And you realize the people were so poor that they had to build the churches themselves. And if you look at the walls, you'll see their handprints in the walls where you see they built the buildings out of the inexpensive mud materials that they had. And I said, you know, we're all connected, and I would owe them a debt of gratitude because of their compassion, their love, their kindness, their joy, their desire to have a better world. They're helping me heal from a society that doesn't necessarily want me to heal. And so in that magical way, we're connected to people through time. So we think they're in the distant past, but when their compassion and their love touches us now, they're alive. They're here now. And if we're paying attention, we can touch their seeds and they can heal us. So, you know, I'm listening and I'm learning as I'm listening to you. So I would say that what really is required is a dialogue between the heritage community and the convert community, and not one of I know mind. It's better to have the I don't know mind. I'm not Risha Kosak, I remember we don't talk like that, but that's the way I listen to things. I don't know mind. And then we're open to possibilities that we would never have conceived of on our own, to have freedom from the known. So that's how I answer it, you know, that Buddhism enables us to see our suffering in a way that is healing and whole and gives us hope, and enables us not to give hope for just ourselves, but for others. So that's how I would say it.
I love that. And I just want to add something about the pilgrimage. When I saw, so the Americans going to Korea and interacting, I just observed, you know. And so we stayed at the university that I used to teach at. It's a seminary, actually. It's the Yongsan University of Sun Studies. And talk about communication. It was through the body. It was through the laughter. It was through pairing them up, chanting together. So after the pilgrimage, I asked the members who went, I said, what's the most memorable thing about the pilgrimage? They said the human connection. It was a human connection. And these are the connections that still exist to this day. They're still live here in the United States. They still contact these students, you know, the pre-ministers, right? So there's something about connecting on that level. It's beyond words. You know, that's just a feeling here. It's like I'm with you, you know. We're in this space together, right? You don't forget that. You don't forget that.
And I would just want to say one thing. That's one of the things Americans have to learn or relearn. You know, so often we're measured by our size of our wallets or what position we have. But so many times a person giving me breakfast in the morning, who before they went to work, because I was studying maybe to become a Dharma teacher, and they would come and prepare breakfast, and this was their practice, right? This was their practice to be kind to me. You know, and I was thinking, my goodness, this person had to get up at 4 a.m. to do this. Why are you making me, you know, feel weird? But their kindness, I will never forget. That human interaction that you said. They couldn't speak English and I couldn't speak Japanese. But I could understand that they cared for my life. I could understand that.
You know, I'm going to keep going with this pilgrimage theme a little bit, because similar experiences for myself. And but I want to say something that's so interesting about how we change, right? In my experience, how we change when we are open to learning from a culture that is not the one we grew up in. So Zen Buddhism doesn't just bring Buddhism. I'm sure, you know, it brings Japanese culture into it. It brings a way of interacting with each other. It brings Confucianism with it. It brings Taoism with it. It brings Kami culture with it. It brings lots into the space. And before I went to Japan, you can't tell the difference between what's Zen ritual and what's Japanese culture. And one thing that kind of funny thing that struck me was there's this way that we lead people through ritual, and you hold your arm out and you take them through a whole process in the ritual process. And to me, that was Zen ritual culture. That's what we did. It's a kind of Buddhist caretaking. I go to Japan, and every time somebody showed me to an elevator, they did the same thing, right? This was not something that was in ritual culture. This was a way of caring for each other in a community in a way where one's attention stays with you the whole time. What an amazing gift to a culture here where we speed past each other so often. And what something to learn. But the thing that struck me that was very powerful in terms of being seen and how deeply things can shift in this kind of dialogue. And when by dialogue, I don't mean talking, I mean our bodies are in dialogue with each other. Our bodies are in transformative dialogue with each other. Is I was on the plane going to Japan, and I was in my priest garb. And I've worn that priest garb in public in the United States 1,000 times, and no one knows what to do with it. And I'm a karate instructor. I'm all kinds of things, right? So it's not legible. When I was on the plane, I was in line for the bathroom, and a 60-ish, 70-ish year old Japanese man looked at me and insisted on getting out of the way and letting me go first. And there was something, and it was clear it was important to him, so I did. But the thing that broke and opened my heart in that moment was, it was the first time that I felt what it was like to be seen in a community context as a spiritual person, where the community understood who you were outside of my immediate Sangha. What it was like to be contextualized in that way and to feel that. And that's a powerful thing. So I say that because we do need to be in conversation with each other across the convert and heritage communities. We need to be in conversation with each other in order to care for each other. We need to be in conversation, and especially convert Buddhists who are in positions that carry more power than is possible if you're immigrant or a person of color in this country. And I feel the other piece is this learning, and in some ways finding one's connection to a spiritual inheritance that just in some ways can't happen without that conversation. There's something deeply we're losing, and I'll stop there. And if you want to pick it up, and I'm teasing you a little bit here on this one, James, but if you want to pick this up, there's a conversation we're talking about here, and there's secular Buddhism.
Sure. There's a lot. I mean, I have to practice more meditation because my memory isn't as fast as it once was. So I'm writing things down as you two are talking so I can keep up. I'm just being honest. But one of the things that you were saying, and I will go to the last part a little on, but being seen, one of the things that Buddhism, I think, really does is it enables us to learn how to be seen, and also teaches us how to see. I think what's really beautiful about that story is that elderly gentleman didn't say, oh, he's just wearing a costume. He could see by your demeanor and who you were a priest. And he was going to revere you as the Buddha's messenger. That's very important, how we see, and what do we see? So that's one of the powerful things that Buddhism, I think, does. It opens up the door for us to see each other in new ways. And that's what I think the gift he gave me from your story was that he saw you as a whole person with potential of the Buddha. and he was going to act accordingly to that. So that's what came to me. So I wrote that down. But the other part of it was I thought was important was what you just said. One of the things is what you're saying, and we talked about it previously, is the idea of we can separate out. And that's part of the Western concept of, I don't want to call it, I'll just call it the Supremacy Doctrine. We have an idea that if we can categorize people and we can put them in a box, we can know who they are and how they are, and we can therefore sort of define the limits of their humanity. And that's sort of, to me, in a lot of ways, what the issue is between, I don't want to use the common parlance, they say, Buddhism without beliefs, as if those human interactions that human beings have, the need to recognize births, transitions, marriages, deaths, are somehow secondary, but we have some special power that we're going to ignore outside of that. And so, again, when you do that, you miss one of the key concepts that Buddhism provides: the ability to see, the ability to listen. You said before, Bodhisattva Kuan-An, right? Kuan Yin, Avalokitesvara, to hear the cries of the world. And so that's what I would say. Anyway, that's my viewpoint. Grace, what do you think?
Yeah. I'm just reflecting on that word, that phrase that Kosin was talking about being seen. I think what comes up to me is that that's our struggle as Asian Americans, and many times is that we're invisible, historically as well. This, and then we internalize that. So the practice for me, I was trying to make a connection between feeling invisible and how my practice has helped me to work with that, because it's a reality. And one of the blessings that I feel is that, number one, the practice has taught me and really pointing me towards trusting myself, a really profound trust, right? Trust that you have a power. Like I have, my teacher would say to me, he said, go look in the mirror and say, you are Buddha. You are Buddha. Right. I tried it a few times. It was a bit awkward. Right. But saying, Grace, you have power. And I'm not talking about status or rank, but it's a power that is greater than yourself. Call it the divine, call it whatever you want. It's actually ineffable, but that you have that. And it's that which connects me to Mother Nature, right? It's that which connects me to my ancestors, and that no one can take away from me. So although people outside, they may say, well, you're invisible, but I tap into that part of myself that says, hey, I have a voice, and I'm going to use it. And I think that's one of the fortunate things that I'm realizing is that, number one, I have this platform right now, just engaging in this conversation with both of you, with all of you, which was not available to my ancestors or those before me in the past. Right? They were silenced and they could not speak. So the practice for me, it's about going inward. I was taught this from our fourth head Dharma master, Cosin, go inward, become one with yourself so that you can go outward and become one with other people. Right? And I always remember that. And it's helped me to really start to deconstruct binaries and that way of thinking. Right? So I'm with you, Reverend James, too. I'm learning. Here I am. Let's do the work. Yeah.
I'm going to pick up on something that I learned from one of my students that changed the way I related to how I bring myself into the world as a Buddhist, and how my own culture was. I grew up in a Pennsylvania Dutch Germanic Protestant culture. You don't stand out. It's a compliment, and I'm not exaggerating. It's a compliment to be called plain. Being called fancy is an insult. So you just don't make a splash in the world. And when the monastery was starting, we have something called a han, which is a piece of wood outside that you strike that calls the monks to the monastery. And there was, at some point, a neighbor got upset about it, didn't know what it was. We stopped using it for a while. And then I was being shy, kind of bringing it back into use again. And because of my own conditioning. And we were having a residence meeting. And there were three students here that two of Japanese descent and one of Korean and Chinese descent. And what came out of it was one voiced their pain about us not doing it because it was bringing up for them the way that they had to stay invisible within the community around them as an East Asian person. And that we were basically doing the same thing. And I mean, I can feel the pain now. It breaks my heart. I saw something I was doing that I didn't see that perspective. And then immediately we drew up flyers and wrote up all the sounds for the monastery and circulated it to the neighbors and got going again. But that way in which, if we're not careful, we're just accidentally reinscribing the same patterns that vis-a-vis the wider community that's used to having things their way and used to having things going the sounds they're used to. I mean, nobody has an issue with the church bells, right? So that was a real lesson for me, because now it's a very different feeling, which is I have to relate to my Buddhist practice and heritage and the authority that I've been given within that in a way that cares for the people who brought it to me. And not have my sight so limited in those ways. So that, thank you, Grace, for what you brought up, because it made me think of that, which was a good teaching for me.
And I was just going to say, that's actually one of the most important things I think that we have to be mindful of. Often we'll react to some reality out there that we perceive through our own perceptions, our own ideology, our own stories, if you will, our own narratives. And what we're really doing is keeping ourselves in the same fence that we're thinking we're getting out of, right? And so one of the things that we talk about, supremacy or whatever it is, frequently people are often using the same ideology, language of violence that was perpetuated against them to perpetuate it against others. So we have to be mindful of another way. And so one of the things that I was glad you shared that, Greg, because I'm always very mindful of that. I think many people in my Dharma center are Japanese heritage, and they would be loath to say that they would be taken aback by maybe something Americans would do. They just won't mention it to us, right? They'll just say those are the American people doing their thing. But I'm very mindful of the fact that there was a cultural transmission as well as the Dharma teaching at the same time. And to show respect for a person's culture is to recognize them as well and to see them. And that you need to do both. And to recognize the beauty and wonder of another culture is not to diminish your own culture, but it elevates it. So I'm very, very happy that you said that, because it's one of the key things I always keep mindful of. And what's very interesting also about ritual, you mentioned ritual, God doesn't tell you what the heck the ritual is about. Ring the bell, stand in front of there. The only thing you know is I have it behind me is the eternal Buddha Shakyamuni is representative of this, the great life of the force of the universe, the action of the universe, dependent origination in the real world. That's the way I just put it for right now. We don't have a clue. But what's amazing is, as you practice more and more, you start to say, wow, the incense are a form of communication. The ring of the bell is to remind me to come back to what am I thinking about? Who am I? So totally, but it happens sort of organically and naturally. So that's why it's like, just follow. People say, just follow me. I'm not just following. I'm an American. I'm not listening to you. You know, so there's a lot of things, but I think it's beautiful. I think it's wonderful because I think, again, it gets people to think about things and it gives us hope. I always go back to that, you know, and to be present. To be present. Anyway, that's my feeling.
I find both of your conversations so refreshing. I'll be honest, refreshing because well, Buddhism right now, we're in the transition phase of creating a new headquarters here in the United States. We have the central headquarters in Korea, but we're forming a new constitution, new headquarters, new, head Dharma master. And these are the things that will come up, right? But to hear from both of you, the emphasis and importance of keeping that communication, understanding the importance of honoring tradition, is very refreshing to hear from me. It's very nice. So I want to thank both of you. And I also have hope too, James. I also have hope. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Same here with the hope, and same here from the tradition that doesn't tell you anything at all. Just do things and don't ask questions. Of course, Americans always ask questions, but as we're coming to a time when we're going to open up to questions, I have a question for you both. It's very pragmatic. What do we do to start? I mean, we've said some things, but you mentioned, James, a very real thing where Asian communities were being attacked, in New York when the pandemic first came out. Not the only time, but there was an increase during that time. And there's a way in which we're not attending to that, and there's also a way in which that there's not a real clear respect. And I don't mean respect in this way that we do it in the interfaith way, where it's like way up here and we're just kind of respecting each other. I mean, and we're not in the trenches with each other. I mean, how do we get in the trenches with each other? Like, how is there respect? How is there respect in that way where we're engaged? Because this is a real question in a place like New York, where we're sometimes 6 blocks away from each other, and we've never had a communication. And so what's happening there? And do we need to do anything about that at all? And if we do, what?
I'll start only because I just want to say that, again, the Buddhist Council of New York, we represent a large number of Buddhists here in the New York City area. Surrounding community, about probably more than 800,000. Sounds astronomical, because it is astronomical. Well, quite frankly, a lot of the Buddhists here are hidden. We have people who are here. I don't like to use illegal. I use the term unauthorized. We have a large number of people who are unauthorized from China and places like that. And so we had to protect their safety from previous administration policies. I'll just put it that way, in the shorthand. But because of certain things were said, such as the China flu and things of that nature, many communities started having people getting attacked. And the only reason why I'm bringing that up is not to say I did it. The idea for me is Buddhism has to require action. Greg and I had once this conversation a long time about the 4 immeasurable minds: limitless joy, limitless compassion, loving kindness. And he said to me, well, James, don't ever forget, each of those always has the component of action with it. And I never forget that. And so, no, we can't sit back. One famous monk used to say, winter never fails to turn into spring. Nichiren Daishonin, a 12th century monk, said that. Winter never turns into spring. And what he was saying is, you may plant a seed and you may not see the result right away. That's not your job. Your job is to keep planting. And so we must continue to plant good seeds, knowing that when the conditions are right, they will bear fruit. And so I took that as the mantle of what we had to do, and I continue to do that. Am I tired? Sometimes, yeah, I am. It's a lot. It's a lot, because some people That's not why they became Buddhists, quite frankly. They became Buddhists. I call them the yoga, make mindfulness Buddhist, I want to cool out and, be peaceful, and everybody get out of my way. And if you're in my way, then you're an obstacle to my happiness. But I think one of the key things I always try to say is, instead of looking at people as obstacles, let's look at each other as an opportunity to reveal our joy. And if we can do that, then what we're supposed to do will happen automatically. Because if I look at you as, I see Greg, I see Grace, and I see you as an extension of my mother and my father, and I really mean that. My father is literally in the house with me, as also I talked to you guys before. But if I look at you and say, you are the continuation of the love and compassion that my mother has put forth from this planet, then I have no choice but to treat you a certain way. So for me, we have a lot of work to do. We've just begun, because we really do look at each other much differently. That person's from that community. I'm not from this community. That's not my Dharma school. That's not my tradition, not my problem. Yes, it is. And once we admit it, then we can start to act and help things get better. But that's my answer to that.
Oh, thank you for that, James. Yes, much work to do. And the word that comes to my mind is we need to come together. We really need to come together. When you told me, James, that you had the group, you made that decision to voice up, to have that anti-Asian initiative, that to me showed solidarity. And my responsibility now too is, how do we do that for the anti-Blackness, right? We need to come together to make real changes. And it starts with interrogating myself first. What have you internalized? What are you practicing unconsciously that is creating more harm, right? So I feel, as Buddhist leaders and teachers, this is our role and our responsibility. And I feel today, that's why I just feel so grateful to have this space and this conversation with all of you. Mm-hmm.
And I do want to clear up one thing, because I don't want to leave that impression. I would never say it was clearly the actions of the Buddhist Council working together with my Asian brothers and sisters, my Dharma brothers and sisters, who made that decision to take on anti-Asian violence seriously. And they just permitted me to be the voice for that action. It's very important that I say that.
Thank you both. Thank you both. It's so it's nourishing listening to you both, and I agree with the hope. This kind of conversation, if they can be had more, and if they can become action, if they can become activity, then there's hope. So thank you both. And at this time, we'll just open up to folks who want to ask questions or offer comments. And I think Peace, yeah. Thank you, Peace.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I can feel your hearts through the screen, and I am touched. I'm just really filled with gratitude right now. And the invitation for those of you listening and taking all of this in is, right now, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, in the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, but you also have the opportunity to raise your hand and come on screen and ask a question to our panelists here and show your face as well. So if you prefer that modality, you can go to the bottom of your screen, I believe, and there'll be an option to raise your hand. And we'll see that, and we'll invite you on screen. So as we transition into that, there are already a few questions in the Q&A. So let me open this up, and I'll read, one of them, and I'll let you choose how and who would like to respond. So I'll start here with the first one from Jenny O. Buddhism was brought to the US by people born into a practicing family. It also came from less capitalist countries. What are your thoughts on its evolution in the US since converts have such a different experience, at times much more secular?
Either of you want to take that?
Grace, I mean, I can answer, I mean, from my perspective. Yeah, I mean, there's no question that what we're seeing is we're going to see a new economy. The capitalist structure that we've understood and the way we've understood it is going to no longer be around. You cannot continue to exploit the air and the water and the people indefinitely and that system survive. Matter of fact, I'm writing on this, and the article I'm writing is called Buddhism and Mindfulness, Transformation of American Business. That's the article that I'm writing. And I really believe that where we are right now is that we're going to have to look to the Dharma and look to new ways of interacting communally, and that will cause us to have a new economics. It's hard to believe that it is because we're like fish bowls in a, like fish in a fish bowl in the water, and we can't imagine ourselves outside of that pond, right? Because that's all we know. I got my little American, deceased notables, dead presidents in my pocket, right? But it can't sustain itself, and the world is becoming one economic system. So I think we're going to see some dramatic changes there. And the other part of the question was, I think about, yeah, I mean, it is much different, and that's a good thing. It is from a different fabric. It is a different way of looking at the world. It is a different way of looking at families. Too often we look at families as, again, I said, as obstacles. Our families as opportunities, we'll have a different society. But that's my view.
So, right, the second part is talking about the secular part. So what I've been tending to see is in the tradition that I'm in, with a lot of people that come, there's that mistaken belief that practice is just on the cushion, right? That it's just a Sunday thing, and then the rest of the week is just work. So we're very clear in One Buddhism. The motto is Buddha Dharma is daily life is Buddha Dharma. You don't separate your work from your practice, right? Practice becomes your work. So everything that you do can be a spiritual practice, right? And you don't separate the training from your everyday activities. So I see that can be a tendency. This is, and why mindfulness keeps coming up too, as well, that criticism that it's become individualistic practice, that it's just about my own awakening, enlightenment, without fully examining the social structures that make it impossible for certain groups to attain liberation, right? So I think just being very aware of that there is that tendency to see practice as something separate, that it has to be separate from life. But I think we need to bring those two together, so to say that life is your practice.
I'll just say one short thing. I think my experience is that there will be strands of Buddhism in the U.S. that reject completely some of the cultural aspects of what's come to us, and there will be those who don't, and there will be those who embrace it, and there will be some of us who appreciate. We talked about this before, and when we talked, that appreciate what, say, the Confucianist aspect of Zen has to teach our bodies and our ways of being together, what the Taoist aspects of Zen have to teach us about the earth, and will allow those things to affect us. And then there will be some people who won't, because, to James's point about a kind of supremacist worldview, they don't want to be affected by things from the outside. They want to take it over. So there's some of us will take it over, and some of us will allow ourselves to be changed, and those will be different traditions of Buddhism. So.
Yes, thank you for those responses. And there's another question here. If any or all of you want to speak a little bit more, you've already spoken to it a little bit, but can you speak more to the balance of action and non-action as it relates to social chains and Buddhist practice?
I'm terrible at that balance, so I'm not. I'm the wrong person to respond. So, action and non-action. Well, I'll give the Zen answer and then a practical one. In some ways, where we're going with our practice is to find the stillness that is in all activity. So when we are active, we're not coming from a place that is activating or that is pushing us along or that is egoically driven. We're allowing ourselves to be Mother Earth. We're allowing ourselves to be our ancestors that are supporting us. We're allowing ourselves to be the whole of experience that's arising in a moment. And it isn't about a small me trying to get something done. That I'm just a piece of a current that's moving. So that's one thing is actually that the transformational request that we recognize and embody the stillness that is through all things. The practical response is we're all different, and we have to find our way, like how much activity is too much and what exhausts us and what's our way of showing up in the world as somebody who's committed to social justice or social transformation. What is our way and what's our capacity? And I don't think anybody can tell you that. I think you have to find that for yourself and do what's sane, because we need sanity. We deeply need sanity.
So when I read this question, I wasn't sure how the person was defining action or non-action, but when I saw the word non-action, I changed that to kind of preparation. In that times of quiet, those moments when I go inwards, that's non-action. It's not actually, it's action, but it's a very, very personal practice of training the mind, of preparing myself so that when I am out there, when I'm speaking, as Greg was saying, it comes from a place of centeredness, not from a place of resentment or hate, but comes from a place of, I really, truly want to make transformation from this place of love, from this place of there's non-duality here, you know? So preparation so that when I'm in action, I'm ready to speak from a place of love.
I'm not going to say too much other than what was already said, because I think a lot of times people think action, especially in the United States, I've got to confront. We think that is what we think of as action. And confrontation can be good. It's okay. I say sometimes you need to confront things, right? But the idea of non-action, Buddhism always says everything's impermanent. So even when we're sitting there, things are changing. But like Reverend Grace said, but are we centered enough so that we're prepared to act in a way that accords with the great life of the universe, the spirit that is going to bring forth transformation for ourselves and others? So yeah, it's not so easy. I complained to Greg offline about this a year ago and said, I'm overwhelmed, somebody help me. So it's easier said than done, but you do your best.
Thank you. So this next question I'll read is this. I have experienced Buddhism in the West. Is focused on meditation. In some Asian countries, it is the focus on cultivating merit and wisdom. I think to bring some social change, components of merit and wisdom is important to bring social change. Do you think this component is relevant in the United States?
Oh, yes. More than ever. We don't live in the mountains. We are here in the city or wherever you live right now. We are interacting with people all the time. And so when I think about it, the moment that we wake up to the moment that we go to bed, we are making choices. And those choices are based on this first, a thought, right? And that choice takes us on different trajectories, right? And so definitely, I think since we are living in this contemporary era, what choices we make in life are so important. And those choices are based on our sound thinking, right? Sound thinking. And that sound thinking is based on the foundation of wisdom and compassion. So there's I think we need to be focusing on this ethical component that sometimes gets erased in this whole mindfulness movement, for example, that it's not just about, awareness is important, but what choices are we making? Is it, wholesome, unwholesome, benefit or harm? I think these are important questions that we should ask ourselves. And when we do that, then we build the merit or the blessings and we hone the wisdom, right? So more than ever, the answer to the question is yes. I think this component is relevant everywhere, but yes, in the United States as well.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm a Risha Kosakai member, and we talk about merits all the time. Maybe that's one of the things that sometimes in the convert community they don't like talking about. But in my Buddhist practice, merits are essential. And the way I make it accessible, so you think merits and not merits, whatever, what we talk about is cherishing every encounter. That every encounter reveals the interlocking, working relationship of the universes of cause and effect. Right? Sounds flat. Just simple things. What should we do? How should we behave? To respect and revere the sacredness of the person or the situation in front of you. And by doing so, you reveal your own sacredness to yourself. So that as you interact with life, you are meditating. You don't have to just sit down and meditate. It's an active living meditation, sort of what Reverend Grace was saying before. So by doing that, you begin to create merit and you begin to create a world that begins to be the world we want to have. Frequently in Buddhism, the land of tranquil light. So yeah, so merits are really important because they help transform you and they transform your world.
The Dharma's been spoken. I got nothing else.
Wonderful. All right. Well, here's the next question. How do you all approach the tension between cultural continuity and cultural transformation for reasons both controllable and uncontrollable? How do we cultivate skill in navigating preservation and innovation?
What comes up for me is this is where I actually do feel that the practice, that whether it's meditation, whatever contemplative, whatever practice it is that our tradition does that cultivates prajna, it cultivates the wisdom that comes up from the body, because that's where that's where the continuity and the transformation meet. That's the place from which we can have a kind of sight that allows us to feel into skillful means, in a given situation? When is it time for when is a particular ritual the good medicine, and when is it not the good medicine? And when is it, and sometimes it's the good medicine for 3 people in our community and 7 other people it's not. So how do you make that work? And it doesn't really work well from here to navigate that. I mean, we need that. We need the intellect, but there does need to be some deepening into the body and deepening into connection and feeling into and conversing with the members of our community in ways that we have a deeper sense of what's given, because I have never experienced myself particularly skillful if I'm only making those decisions rationally. I'm only making those decisions in my thinking mind. I need the whole of my being opened up. I need the whole of my body, the whole of my heart. Shin. I mean, if we're going to use the language that we use it's shin, it needs to come from this heart mind space in the center of the body, that we know things that we don't normally know. So there, I would say that practice is really important.
The Dharma's been spoken. The Dharma's been spoken, Greg. But I just want to add, when you talked about prajna, in the one Buddhist traditions, it's important. It's huge, and the way we go about it is through inquiry, right? Inquiry, and the inquiry, it's interesting, is because you do your self inquiry, but you also get the opinions of other people, right? And if the answer doesn't come, you put it aside for a while. And sometimes that space allows something to come up with the prajna, the wisdom, something comes up. This interesting thing about prajna, about this innate wisdom that we have. And in our tradition as well, this practice of inquiry helps create space to see different perspectives, right? This what I think is extremely important, that spaciousness, to see it from the big picture, from the small, from the perspective of change, right? And you can use this form of inquiry in everything you do, because actually this whole world is our living scripture. Everything. I once asked my teacher, I was like, there's no questions. He goes, how can you not have questions? This whole world is a question. Right? Everything you see should be a question for you. Universal principles, human affairs, these are your questions, right? So this practice, I think, is extremely important. So I just want to share our inquiry practice in the One Buddhist tradition.
I definitely feel the Dharma's been spoken. The only thing I would say is that, change is always, impermanence is, things are always changing. One of the problems is we often look at the past in our culture as a fixed reality. One of the problems is looking at it, it's sort of like looking at the past is like putting on glasses with purple, and the world looks purple when you have those glasses on, right? But we need to see things as they are. And so looking at even the past of our culture with clear mind, seeing things as they are, will reveal things that we didn't otherwise see. So it's very important not to think, I know what that was, right? I know mine. It's the I don't know mine that will reveal where the tradition can go.
Grace, did you want to add more?
I was just to say yes, and don't fall into that hole of self-righteousness, but thank you for that, yes.
Thank you. There's a question that came on YouTube, one of the viewers there, and this might go nicely with what you were just saying. And the question goes, is asking about specific mantras or sutras you might recommend leaning into during these times. Any thoughts?
In One Buddhism, we have the Namu Amitabha, right? Taking refuge in the limitless life, enlightenment, our original nature. Namu Amitabha. And just chanting this it's actually been healing for people that I know who had COVID, actually. And he had shared with the group that he said that the medication wasn't working, but the mantra brought him healing, right? So just focusing on that sound, Namu Amitabha, right? Taking refuge in my limitless life enlightenment, that power within me, that light within me, and that is there, and you're tuning into that, and just focusing on that one sound, right? That helps to settle the mind, settle the thinking. Once the thinking mind settles, right, then the light emerges. So that's from our tradition, and actually we chant it every night at 9 p.m. So it's a great way to end the day. Great way to end the day. Yeah.
I'm from my tradition in Rishigo Sakai, we chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo for almost the same exact reasons Reverend Grace has said. So I'm not going to say that. But I do think that if you do, as a person who was ill, to almost embody the mantra, it's not magic, it's alignment. It's alignment. And they've done studies, I have it now in different areas with mantras. People always say, do these things work? I don't know if anyone's ever done the hate love jar experiment. Has anyone even heard of that? The hate love jar, and you look and you say, I hate you to the rice, and I love you rice. I haven't had anybody who's had a neutral response. Most of the time they've seen when they said I hate you to the rice, it turns to mold. And I always say, if that can happen to our thinking and thought process to objects that are dynamic, such as rice, what's happening when we're thinking certain thoughts and certain mantras inside of us? They're transformative. So I would recommend Namo Mira Buddha. I would recommend Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, or Gate Paragate Parasamgate Swaha. Anything that will connect you at a deeper level to your hope and joy.
We always chant the Enmei Juku Kanongyo when we're for difficulties, which is a call to bring up Kuan Yin or Kanon and the Bodhisattva of compassion. A little bit longer, though, a chant. When you asked about a sutra, what came to mind, and I wonder if all of our traditions do this, is the sutra that's often talked about as the sutra to read during, literally, I mean, quite explicitly during difficult times, is the Lotus Sutra. I don't know if you want to take on the Lotus Sutra, but it's out there, and you can see how it feels for you. But that's what came to mind.
And I'd be remiss to say, I have to say, that is the sutra that Rishigo Sakai actually has us study. That's the one that I study and was trained as a Dharma teacher in.
Wonderful. We have one more question here. And this might round out the evening nicely. So it says, COVID has given us a moment of pause to really see what is happening in the world and within ourselves. What kind of advice would you give to those of us using this time to self-reflect and how to manage all those swirling emotions that come up with looking within?
All right, I'll start. I can honestly say that in my Rishigo Sakai, we call COVID now Bodhisattva COVID. And we say Bodhisattva COVID not because we're being flippant, but because we recognize how profound this pandemic has been. It's given us an idea to focus on those things that are important to our lives. Our connections to each other. the need to protect each other, our understanding of the vulnerability of the elderly and of the young, and of some of those communities who were invisible to us. Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, it doesn't matter if you're tall or if you've got muscles or you don't. All of us equally are being impacted by this. So in that way, it gives us, as you said in the question, it gives us a chance to pause and to focus on those things for which the life of the universe has given us life.
I just want to add that this time, just like reflecting on my time during this COVID, has been one of realizing that out of harm can come grace. That I start to notice things that I took for granted, right? And so the mantra for me today, what I do is gratitude. I truly reflect on the things that help me to sustain, just help that sustains my existence in this very moment, and realizing that I'm not here alone, that there are many causes and conditions. And so when I wake up in the morning, one of my practices is just to wake up and reflect on things that I'm grateful for, right? So I hope that could be one of the practices during this time, especially if you're having swirling emotions, to just take a moment to pause and to reflect on things that sustain us, you know. And so in this moment, when I think about this moment, when I see Greg and James, actually I haven't met you in the flesh, but I know that we've sat together before. Same with Peace and Ian, or Travis and Cheryl, and all of you out there. It's like we come together. There's no coincidence. We've sat together. We've been together before, and this has just been such a lovely time. I feel very lucky.
I think the only thing that I would add is the pandemic has brought a lot of things to a stop. And I'm not in any way speaking about people here, but there are a lot of things in our particular routines or lives that maybe aren't supposed to survive the pandemic. Maybe aren't supposed to start back up. And I think we need to take the time to discern, to Grace's point, to discern what sustains us, what nourishes us, and what just didn't. Its lifespan has come to an end. And some of those things are hard to give up because they're habits, or we have ideas that they're who we are, that's who I am. Maybe not anymore. And so to just give space for the parts of us that are finished. And the pandemic has given us a really wonderful moment to do that. And as a species, I pray that it wakes us up to our speed generally, and it wakes us up to our activity that's been crushing one another in the earth, and that we leave that behind. That we let that be something whose lifespan has come to an end. I don't know that we will, but I pray that we will. So. I think that's the last question. So that means it's me to say thank you, James and Grace, so much for being here. Everything you said, everything you are, just beautiful. Thank you. And you're just cool. I hope we can go to a jazz show or something, after this is over.
Me too. Thank you. Thank you.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Buddhist party.
Yeah.
And Peace, thank you for everything again,
Yes.
for all you've done, and to Cheryl and Travis, thank you, and to all of you who came tonight. It's a joy to be with you. Please take good care of yourself, get rest, love yourselves, and love each other. All right. Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Night. Good night.
Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Bye.